The cold winter wind howled through the valley, cutting through Zara Harper's wool coat as she stood before the freshly dug grave. A small wooden cross marked the final resting place of her unborn child, lost to complications no doctor in Redemption Creek could have prevented. She placed a single wildflower on the mound of dirt, her tears falling silently as Yates Crawford, her husband of 3 years, stood 10 paces behind her, his hat clutched in his hands, unable to approach, unable to speak. It was 1878 in the Colorado Territory, and the promise of their life together was crumbling faster than the eroding banks of the creek that gave their small town its name. "We should head back," Yates finally said, his voice rough from disuse. "Storm's coming." Zara didn't respond. She hadn't said more than a few necessary words to him in the 2 weeks since they'd lost the baby. Their small cabin, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, had become a silent tomb of grief. Yates slept in the barn most nights, telling himself it was to give her space. But knowing deep down, it was because he couldn't bear the accusation in her eyes, the unspoken blame that perhaps, if he hadn't insisted they try homesteading in such a remote area, if they'd stayed in Denver where there were proper doctors, their child might have lived. Zara finally turned from the grave, walking past Yates without meeting his eyes. She climbed onto their wagon without assistance, something that would have been unthinkable before. Yates secured his hat back on his head, the brim low over his eyes, hiding the moisture gathering there. He wasn't supposed to cry. He was a cowboy, a rancher, a husband. He was supposed to be strong. But how could a man be strong when his world was collapsing and he didn't know how to rebuild it? The ride back to their homestead was silent save for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from their horses. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the storm Yates had predicted. Appropriate, he thought bitterly. The heavens themselves seemed to be mourning what they had lost. As they approached their modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of pines, Zara spoke her first complete sentence to him in days. "I'm going to visit my sister in Pueblo." Yates pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to look at his wife. Her once vibrant face was pale, her blue eyes dull with grief. "For how long?" "I don't know." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Yates knew what she wasn't saying, that she might not come back. "Zara," he began, but she was already climbing down from the wagon, walking toward the cabin with determined steps. He watched her go, remembering the day he'd first seen her 3 years earlier, selling jars of honey at the general store in Denver. She'd been laughing, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, and he'd fallen in love instantly. He'd been working as a cattle driver then, saving every penny to buy his own land. She'd been the daughter of a beekeeper, more educated than most frontier women, with dreams of her own. Somehow, against all odds, she'd fallen in love with him too. Now, as the first drops of rain began to fall, Yates wondered if love was enough to survive this kind of loss. The next morning, Zara was gone before dawn. She'd left a note saying the stagecoach would take her to Pueblo, that she needed time. She hadn't written when or if she would return. Yates stood in their cabin, the note crumpled in his fist, feeling more alone than he had in his entire life. Days turned to weeks. Yates threw himself into work on their homestead, expanding the barn, breaking new ground for planting, exhausting himself physically so he wouldn't have to think. But at night, lying in their empty bed, the thoughts came anyway. Memories of Zara's laugh, of her excitement when she'd told him she was with child, of the plans they'd made for their family. After a month, he rode into town, composing a letter to her at her sister's address in Pueblo. The words came hard. He'd never been good with them. Not like Zara, who read books and wrote beautiful thoughts in her journal, but he tried, telling her he missed her, that he was sorry, that their land was waiting for her return. He didn't mention the baby. He couldn't bring himself to put that grief into words. No reply came. By the time spring arrived, transforming the valley into a carpet of wildflowers, Yates had convinced himself she wasn't coming back. He considered selling the homestead, moving on, but something kept him rooted there. Perhaps it was the memory of how Zara's eyes had lit up when they'd first seen the land, how she'd immediately started planning where the garden would go, where they'd build additions to the cabin as their family grew. It was on a warm May afternoon when Sheriff Morris rode up to his property, dust trailing behind his horse. "Got a telegram for you, Crawford," he said, extending a folded paper. From Pueblo. Yates's heart slammed against his ribs as he took the telegram with dirt-stained hands. He nodded his thanks to the sheriff, waiting until the man rode away before unfolding the paper with trembling fingers. Returning on Thursday stagecoach. Zara. Nothing more, but it was enough to send Yates into a flurry of activity. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, put fresh linens on the bed, even attempted to make bread using Zara's recipe, though the result was far from her light, perfect loaves. He didn't know what her return meant, if she was coming back to him or just to collect her things, but he was determined to show her that he'd tried to keep their home ready for her. Thursday dawned clear and bright. Yates dressed in his best shirt, the blue one Zara had once said matched his eyes. He trimmed his beard, combed his hair, and hitched the wagon early, arriving in town an hour before the stagecoach was due. As he waited, pacing outside the general store, doubts began to creep in. What if she'd changed her mind? What if she took one look at him and realized she couldn't forgive him for what had happened? What if the distance between them had grown too wide to bridge? The sound of the stagecoach approaching pulled him from his thoughts. He stood straighter, hat in hand, heart pounding as the coach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The door opened, and there she was, thinner than before, her face more solemn, but still his Zara. She stepped down without seeing him at first, looking around the familiar main street of Redemption Creek. When her eyes finally found him, Yates couldn't read her expression. For a long, terrible moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then, she walked toward him, her steps hesitant. "Hello, Yates." "Zara." Her name came out rough, emotional. "I'm glad you're back. I'm not sure if I'm staying," she said softly. "I just couldn't. I needed to see." He nodded, understanding even though her words pierced him. "I've kept everything just as you left it." The ride to their homestead was quiet, but not with the heavy silence that had marked their last journey together. This was a tentative quiet, filled with unspoken questions and cautious hope. As they crested the hill that overlooked their land, Zara gasped softly. In her absence, spring had transformed their homestead. The vegetable garden she'd started had been carefully tended, new rows added. A small orchard of apple saplings had been planted along the eastern edge of their property. The cabin had a new porch, with a swing hanging from sturdy beams. "You did all this?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Had to keep busy," Yates replied, not meeting her eyes. "And I hoped you might come back someday." Zara's eyes filled with tears, the first he'd seen since the day they'd lost the baby. "It's beautiful." That evening, they moved around each other cautiously in the cabin, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. They ate a simple supper, speaking of safe topics: her sister's family, the condition of the roads, the new businesses opening in town. Neither mentioned the reason for her departure or the small grave on the hill. As night fell, Yates prepared to sleep in the barn as he had before she left. He gathered a blanket, heading for the door, when Zara's voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" "Thought I'd sleep in the barn," he said, turning to face her. "Give you your space." Zara looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "This is your home too, Yates. You don't have to sleep in the barn." It wasn't an invitation back to their marriage bed, but it was something in acknowledgement that they still shared this life they had built, despite everything that had happened. Days passed in this careful dance. They worked side by side during daylight hours, rebuilding the routines of their life together. Yates would catch Zara looking at him sometimes when she thought he wouldn't notice, her expression unreadable. At night, they slept in the same cabin but maintained a respectful distance, neither quite ready to bridge the final gap between them. One evening, as they sat on the new porch swing, watching the sunset paint the valley in the golds and purples, Zara finally spoke of what had been unsaid between them. "I blamed you," she said quietly, "when we lost the baby. I blamed you for bringing me out here, away from doctors and civilization. It wasn't fair, but grief isn't fair." Yates swallowed hard, his hands gripping his knees. "I blame myself too." Zara turned to look at him, surprised. "You did?" "Every day," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought if I'd been a better provider, if I'd taken you to the doctor in Denver when you first started feeling poorly, If I'd built us a life in town instead of out here, maybe our child would have lived. Tears slipped down Zara's cheeks. The doctor at my sister's church in Pueblo, he said sometimes these things just happen, that even in the best hospitals in the East, mothers lose babies. He said it wasn't anyone's fault. Yates nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. I needed to hear that, Zara continued. I needed to believe it wasn't because of choices we made, but even knowing that, I was afraid to come back. Why? Yates asked, finally looking at her. Because I was afraid we'd lost more than our baby. I was afraid we'd lost us. The honesty of her words hung in the evening air between them. Yates wanted to reach for her hand, to pull her into his arms, but he held back, sensing she wasn't finished. My sister has 4 children, Zara said after a moment. Watching her with them, it hurt, but it also reminded me of what we'd planned for our family, for our future. She took a shaky breath. I started to wonder if we could still have that future, even after everything that's happened. Hope bloomed in Yates's chest, fragile but undeniable. What did you decide? I decided I needed to come home, she said simply, to see if home was still here. It is, Yates said earnestly. It always will be, as long as you want it. That night, for the first time since before they'd lost the baby, Zara reached for his hand as they prepared for bed. It was a small gesture, but to Yates, it felt like the first ray of sunrise after the longest night of his life. June brought scorching heat and the annual Founders' Day celebration in Redemption Creek. Yates was hesitant to suggest they attend, knowing it would be their first social outing since their loss, but Zara surprised him by mentioning it herself. We should go, she said as they finished breakfast one morning. People will talk if we don't show our faces. Yates studied her, trying to gauge if she was truly ready or merely putting on a brave face. Are you sure? We don't have to if you're not up to it. I'm not sure, she admitted, but we can't hide out here forever, and I think it might be good for us to remember we're still part of this community. The day of the celebration dawned clear and hot. Zara wore a blue calico dress Yates hadn't seen before. She must have bought it in Pueblo and pinned her hair up the way she used to for special occasions. Something about seeing her this way, making an effort to rejoin the world, filled Yates with both pride and protectiveness. The town square was festooned with bunting and flags. Tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and fiddle music filled the air. As they approached, Yates felt Zara's steps falter slightly. He knew what she was thinking. The last time they'd been in town together had been to buy fabric for a baby blanket. We can still turn around, he offered quietly. Zara took a deep breath, then shook her head. No, we're here. They were immediately surrounded by neighbors offering cautious greetings. No one mentioned their absence or the reason for it directly, but there was an unmistakable gentleness in the way people spoke to them. Zara handled it with grace, accepting condolences with quiet thanks, and then deliberately turning conversations to other topics. As the afternoon progressed, Yates watched his wife gradually relax. She even laughed once at something Mrs. Peterson said, the sound catching him off guard. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh. Later, as twilight approached and lanterns were lit around the square, the music shifted to slower, romantic tunes. Couples began to dance, holding each other close in the soft glow of the lamplight. Yates glanced at Zara, remembering how they used to dance at every social, how she'd taught him the proper steps when all he'd known was clumsy shuffling. Would you like to dance? He asked hesitantly, not sure if this was pushing too far, too fast. Zara looked at the dancing couples, then back at him. For a moment, he thought she would refuse, but then she nodded. I'd like that. He led her to the edge of the makeshift dance floor, placing one hand at her waist with careful respect. Her hand came to rest on his shoulder, lighter than a butterfly. As they began to move to the music, Yates was acutely aware of the space between them, not just the physical distance they maintained, but the emotional chasm that still existed. Yet, as the music continued, something shifted. Zara's steps drew closer to his. Her hand on his shoulder grew more certain. By the time the song ended, they were dancing as they once had, moving together as naturally as breathing. When the music stopped, neither moved away immediately. Zara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light, and for the first time in months, Yates saw something there besides grief, a flicker of the connection they had once shared. The ride home that night was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet from before. This silence was filled with possibility rather than pain. As July brought relentless heat to the valley, Yates and Zara fell into a new rhythm. They weren't back to where they had been before their loss, perhaps they never would be, but they were finding their way towards something different, something that acknowledged the pain they had shared while cautiously building something new. They spoke more openly now. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting on their porch swing, Zara would share memories of her time in Pueblo, of the clarity she'd found in her separation from him. Yates, in turn, told her of the loneliness of the winter months, of how he'd talk to her as if she could hear him across the distance. "I used to stand in the doorway at sunset," he confessed one evening, "and imagine you were in Pueblo watching the same sun go down. It made me feel like we were still connected somehow." Zara's hand found his in the gathering darkness. "We were, even when I was angriest, even when I thought I might never come back. I never stopped loving you, Yates." It was the first time either of them had spoken of love since before their loss. The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. "I never stopped loving you either," Yates replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for a single moment." That night, when they retired to bed, Zara moved closer to him than she had in months. She didn't speak, simply rested her head against his shoulder in the darkness. Yates held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, until her steady breathing told him she had fallen asleep. Only then did he allow himself to press a gentle kiss to her hair, hope unfurling in his chest like a banner in the wind. August brought with it the first signs that summer was waning. The days remained hot, but the evenings carried a hint of the autumn to come. The vegetable garden Zara had replanted was yielding a bountiful harvest, keeping her busy with canning and preserving for the winter ahead. One afternoon, Yates returned from mending fences on the far edge of their property to find Zara sitting on the porch steps, an open letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. His heart clenched with fear as he quickly dismounted, crossing to her in long strides. "What's happened?" he asked, kneeling before her. Zara looked up, and to his surprise, he saw that despite her tears, she was smiling. "My sister Charlotte is having another baby," she said softly. "She's due in January." Yates didn't know what to say. He understood that this news would be bittersweet for Zara. Joy for her sister mixed with the sharp reminder of their own loss. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Zara wiped her tears, considering the question. "I thought news like this would break me," she admitted. "But instead, I feel hopeful. Charlotte lost a baby too, before her first was born. She told me once that she never forgot that child, but that her heart expanded to make room for the ones who came after." She looked up at Yates, her eyes bright with tears and something else, determination. "I think I'm ready to try again, Yates. Not to replace the baby we lost, never that, but to continue the family we started." Yates felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. They hadn't shared physical intimacy since before the loss, had only recently begun to rebuild the emotional connection between them. The idea that Zara was thinking of the future, of children, left him momentarily speechless. Seeing his hesitation, Zara's certainty faltered. Unless you don't want to try again. I'd understand if—" "No," Yates interrupted, taking her hands in his. "That's not it at all. I don't want you to feel rushed or to think that I expect this of you." "I don't feel rushed," Zara assured him, "and I know you've never pressured me. This is what I want, Yates, to move forward together, to build the family we always dreamed of." That night, they came together as husband and wife for the first time in nearly 8 months. There was tenderness in their reunion, a careful relearning of each other, but also a deep passion born of separation and the renewed understanding of how precious their bond truly was. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Zara traced the line of Yates's jaw with gentle fingers. "I was so lost," she whispered. "When we lost the baby, it was like I lost myself too. I couldn't see a way forward." "I know," Yates murmured, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I felt the same way." "But you stayed," she said. "You kept our home, our land. everything we'd built together. I had to, he said simply. It was all I had left of us. September brought the harvest, and with it, a letter from Zara's parents in Denver. They were planning to visit at the end of the month, their first trip to the homestead, since Zara and Yates had moved there after their wedding. The news sent both of them into a flurry of preparations. Yates added a coat of whitewash to the cabin's exterior, while Zara sewed new curtains and cushions for the chairs. They worked together to prepare the small guest room, formerly intended as a nursery, for her parents' stay. As they stood in the doorway of the completed room, Zara leaned against Yates's shoulder. "The last time they visited, we were going to tell them about the baby," she said quietly. Yates wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "I know. I'm nervous about seeing them," she confessed. "About being here with them, with all the memories." "We could meet them in town instead," Yates offered. "Take a room at the hotel for all of us." Zara considered this, then shook her head. "No, this is our home, and I think it's important that we face these memories together, with people who love us." The day of her parents' arrival brought clear skies and a crispness to the air that hinted at the changing season. Yates drove the wagon to town to meet them at the stagecoach, while Zara prepared a special welcome dinner. As they came up the road to the homestead, Yates watched Zara's parents' reactions. Martha Wilkins gasped in delight at the sight of the flourishing orchard and garden, while Thomas Wilkins nodded approvingly at the expanded barn and well-maintained fences. Their evident pleasure in the improvements he'd made filled Yates with pride. The reunion between Zara and her parents was emotional. Martha embraced her daughter tightly, whispering something in her ear that made Zara's eyes fill with tears. Thomas, usually a stoic man, looked suspiciously misty-eyed himself as he hugged his daughter. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table enjoying Zara's cooking, the conversation flowed more easily than Yates had feared it might. They spoke of Denver news, of Charlotte's pregnancy, of the changes to the homestead. No one directly mentioned the loss that had sent Zara to Pueblo, but it was present in the gentle way Martha squeezed her daughter's hand. When conversation momentarily lulled, in the approving nod Thomas gave Yates when he noticed the new porch swing. Later, after her parents had retired to the guest room, Zara and Yates sat on that swing, watching stars emerge in the clear night sky. "That went better than I expected," Zara admitted. "Your parents love you," Yates said simply. "They just want you to be happy." "Are we?" Zara asked, turning to look at him. "Happy?" Yates considered the question carefully. "I think we're finding our way back to it," he said finally. "Not the same happiness we had before, but something different, something stronger maybe, because we know what it is to lose it." Zara nodded, leaning against him. "I think so too." The week of her parents' visit passed quickly. Thomas helped Yates with projects around the homestead, while Martha and Zara preserved the last of the garden's bounty. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, sharing stories and memories. Yates watched his wife grow more relaxed with each passing day, as if her parents' presence was helping to heal something in her that had remained broken even after her return. On their last evening together, as Zara and Martha washed dishes, Thomas took Yates aside for a private conversation on the porch. "I want to thank you, son," the older man said, his voice gruff with emotion. "For what, sir?" Yates asked, surprised. "For not giving up on my daughter. When she came to her sisters so broken up, I was afraid—" Thomas paused, clearing his throat. "Well, I've seen marriages that didn't survive such a loss, but you gave her space when she needed it, and a home to come back to when she was ready." Yates swallowed hard, touched by his father-in-law's words. "I love her," he said simply. "I always will." Thomas clasped his shoulder firmly. "I know you do, and she loves you too. I can see it in the way she looks at you now, the same way Martha still looks at me after 30 years. He smiled. "You two are going to be all right." The day after her parents departed, Zara seemed contemplative. Yates gave her space, busying himself with chores until she sought him out in the barn where he was repairing a bridle. "I'd like to visit the grave," she said without preamble. "I haven't been since before I left for Pueblo." Yates set down his work immediately. "Of course, whenever you want." "Now," she said decisively, "while I have the courage. They walked together up the gentle slope behind their property to the small grove of aspens where they had buried their child. Yates had kept the area clear of weeds, and wildflowers had sprouted around the small wooden cross, creating a natural garden. Zara gasped softly when she saw it. "Oh, Yates," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "It's beautiful. I come up here sometimes," he admitted, "to talk to the baby, to tell him or her about the homestead, about you." Zara knelt beside the grave, gently touching the wildflowers. "I should have come sooner." "You weren't ready," Yates said, kneeling beside her. "There's no right or wrong way to grieve, Zara." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't even ask if you had named the baby." "I didn't feel it was my place to do that without you," Yates said, "but I've thought of the baby as our little star. Because that's what the doctor said, that sometimes the brightest stars burn out the fastest." Fresh tears spilled down Zara's cheeks. "Our little star?" she repeated softly. "I like that." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I've been thinking of the baby as a girl. I don't know why." "A little girl," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion, "with your eyes and smile." They sat together by the grave until the sun began to set, sometimes talking, sometimes silent in their shared grief. As dusk fell, painting the western sky in shades of pink and gold, Zara finally stood. "I think I'm ready to go home now," she said, reaching for Yates's hand. The touch of her fingers twining with his felt like a promise. October arrived with its brilliant display of autumn colors. The aspen grove on the hill turned to gold, and the maples near the creek blazed red against the evergreens. Yates and Zara worked together to prepare the homestead for winter, harvesting the last crops, chopping and stacking firewood, making repairs to ensure the cabin would remain warm and secure when snow came. In the evenings, they often sat by the fire, Zara working on her embroidery, or reading aloud from one of her books, while Yates whittled or repaired tools. It was a domestic tranquility that reminded Yates of their first year of marriage, before grief had driven them apart. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows and wind whistled around the eaves, Zara set aside her embroidery with a thoughtful expression. "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Yates nearly dropped the knife he was using to carve a wooden horse. "Are you sure?" "Not completely," she admitted. "It's too early to be certain, but I'm late, and I feel different." She met his eyes across the room. "I'm scared, Yates." He set his carving aside and moved to sit beside her on the settle, taking her hands in his. "I am too," he admitted. "But we've weathered the worst storm already, Zara. Whatever happens, we'll face it together this time. Promise me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. If this baby, if something happens again." She couldn't finish the thought. "We won't lose each other," Yates promised fiercely. "No matter what happens, I won't let you go again." She leaned against him, her body trembling slightly. "I won't leave again," she whispered. "Even if I'm scared, even if I'm hurting. This is where I belong." As November arrived with its shorter days and frosty mornings, Zara's suspicions were confirmed. She was indeed with child, due in early summer. They shared the news cautiously, only telling her parents and a few close friends in town, aware that many difficult months lay ahead before they could truly celebrate. The first snow fell in late November, transforming their valley into a pristine white landscape. Yates woke early one morning to find Zara's side of the bed empty. Concerned, he pulled on his clothes and found her standing on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl, watching the snowflakes drift down in the pale dawn light. "You should be inside where it's warm," he said, coming to stand beside her. She smiled, not taking her eyes from the falling snow. "It's so beautiful. I couldn't resist." Yates wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side for warmth. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better than yesterday," she said. The early weeks of pregnancy had brought bouts of morning sickness, though not as severe as with her first pregnancy. "Yates, I've been thinking—" "About what?" "About names," she said softly. "For the baby." He looked down at her, surprised. With their first pregnancy, she had refused to discuss names, saying it was bad luck to name a baby before it was born. That she was willing to think about it now felt significant. "What names were you considering?" he asked carefully. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Thomas, after my father, she said. And if it's a girl, she hesitated, then continued. I was thinking of Hope. Yates's throat tightened with emotion. Hope, he repeated. It's perfect. December brought the longest nights of the year and preparations for Christmas. They decided to host a small gathering at their homestead on Christmas Eve. Zara's parents, who were staying in town for the holiday, along with a few neighbors and friends. It would be their first time entertaining since before their loss. And Yates could tell Zara was both excited and nervous about the prospect. The day before the gathering, as they decorated the cabin with pine boughs and the few ornaments they possessed, Zara suddenly dropped the candle she was holding, her face going pale. Zara! Yates was at her side instantly, alarm coursing through him. What's wrong? She gripped his arm, her eyes wide with fear. I felt a pain, she whispered, just like before. Yates felt as though his heart had stopped. I'm getting the doctor, he said decisively. No! Zara's grip on his arm tightened. It's just one pain, and the weather you can't go out in this. A blizzard had blown in overnight, leaving deep drifts of snow and dangerous conditions. I don't care about the weather, Yates insisted. I'm not taking any chances with you or the baby. Wait, Zara said, her expression changing. It's gone now, and I think it might have been the baby moving, not a pain at all. Yates stared at her. Moving? Are you sure? She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, a look of wonder crossing her face. There it is again. It's different from last time, more like a flutter than a pain. She looked up at him, joy replacing fear in her eyes. The baby's moving, Yates. He placed his hand beside hers, though he knew it was too early for him to feel anything. Our little one's saying hello, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Zara nodded, tears filling her eyes, telling us everything's all right. The Christmas Eve gathering was a success despite the lingering snow. Their small cabin was filled with warmth, light, and the sound of conversation and laughter. Yates watched Zara move among their guests, serving food and engaging in conversation, her face animated in a way he hadn't seen in over a year. Martha pulled him aside at one point, her eyes misty. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see my daughter happy again, she said. You've given her back to us, Yates. She found her own way back, Yates replied honestly. I just made sure our home was waiting for her. As their guests departed into the cold night, calling out Christmas wishes, Yates and Zara stood in the doorway of their cabin. Arms around each other's waists, watching the lanterns disappear down the snow-covered path toward town. That was perfect, Zara sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. It was, Yates agreed, but I'm glad they're gone. At her questioning look, he smiled. Now I get you all to myself. She laughed, the sound clear and bright in the still night air. You always have me all to yourself out here, Cowboy. And I wouldn't have it any other way, he said, pulling her close for a kiss. Winter settled in earnest across the Colorado Territory. January brought bitter cold and more snow. Confining Yates and Zara to their cabin for days at a time, they used the forced confinement productively. Yates working on indoor projects he'd been putting off, while Zara began sewing baby clothes, allowing herself the joy of preparation she had denied herself during her first pregnancy. In the evenings, they would often sit by the fire, Yates's hand resting on Zara's growing belly, feeling the increasingly stronger movements of their child. They spoke of the future of spring planting, of the nursery they would prepare, of the years ahead, watching their child grow. I think we should plant more apple trees in the spring, Zara said one evening, so our little one can have an orchard to play in when they're older. And grapevines along the south fence, Yates added. You always said you missed your father's grape arbor. They were making plans again, not just for the immediate future, but for years ahead. It felt like a victory over the grief that had nearly destroyed them. February brought Valentine's Day, and with it, a special surprise from Yates. While Zara was visiting a neighbor that afternoon, he set up a romantic dinner in their cabin, using their best dishes and the good tablecloth, lighting candles, and preparing a meal as close to the one they'd shared on their first Valentine's Day, together as his limited cooking skills allowed. When Zara returned home and saw what he'd done, She stopped in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Yates," she breathed. "Happy Valentine's Day," he said, suddenly feeling awkward and unsure. "I know it's not much, but it's perfect," she interrupted, crossing to him and rising on tiptoes to kiss him soundly. "Absolutely perfect." As they ate dinner by candlelight, Yates presented her with his gift, a small wooden cradle he'd been carving in secret over the past months, working on it in the barn during the time Zara was busy elsewhere. Tears filled her eyes as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood, tracing the delicate carvings of stars and moons he'd decorated it with. "For our little star," she whispered. "And for the new star who will sleep in it," Yates said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Zara squeezed his fingers, her eyes shining with love. "I have something for you too," she said. "It's not as beautiful as this, but—" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to him. Yates opened it to find a sketch Zara had always been talented with a pencil of their homestead, as it might look years in the future. The cabin had been expanded, the orchard was in full bloom, and in the foreground, a man and woman stood hand in hand, watching children play near the creek. "Our future?" Zara said softly. Yates felt a lump form in his throat. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," he said hoarsely. After dinner, they sat before the fire. Zara leaning back against Yates's chest, his arms wrapped around her, hands resting on her rounded belly. "Do you remember our first Valentine's Day?" Zara asked, her voice dreamy with the memory. "When you rode all the way to Denver to surprise me?" "How could I forget?" Yates chuckled. "Your father nearly ran me off with his shotgun, showing up at that hour." "He liked you, though," Zara said. "Even then. He told me later he knew you must be serious about me to make that ride in February." "I was serious about you from the first moment I saw you," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I fall more in love with you every day." "Even when I was broken?" she asked softly. "Even when I left?" "Especially then," he said. "Because I saw how strong you truly are. To face that kind of pain, to find your way back from it. You're the strongest person I know, Zara Crawford." She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes luminous in the firelight. "We found our way back together," she said, "and I promise you, Yates Crawford, that whatever happens in the years ahead, we'll face it together." "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. As March arrived, bringing the first tentative signs of spring to their valley, Zara's pregnancy progressed without complications. She bloomed with the season, her body growing fuller as the baby developed, her face glowing with health and happiness. Yates found himself watching her with a mixture of love, pride, and lingering fear. Despite the doctor's assurances that this pregnancy appeared entirely normal, he couldn't help worrying each time Zara mentioned a discomfort or unusual sensation. One afternoon, as they walked together along the creek where the first wildflowers were beginning to appear, Zara stopped suddenly, placing a hand on her back with a grimace. "What is it?" Yates asked immediately, alarm evident in his voice. Zara gave him a gentle smile. "Just a backache, Yates." "It's normal at this stage." "Maybe we should head back," he suggested. "You shouldn't overexert yourself." "A short walk isn't overexertion," she said patiently. "And the doctor said exercise is good for me and the baby." She studied his worried face for a moment, then took his hand, placing it on her rounded belly, where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Feel that? That's a strong, healthy baby, telling you not to worry so much." Yates smiled reluctantly, feeling the movements beneath his palm. "I can't help it," he admitted. "After what happened before." "I know," Zara said softly. "I worry too, Yates, every day, but I'm trying not to let fear steal the joy of this time from us." Her words struck him forcefully. She was right. He had been allowing his fear to overshadow the wonder of this pregnancy, to rob them both of the happiness they deserved. "You're right," he said, pulling her gently into his arms. "I'm sorry. From now on, I'll try to focus on the joy, not the fear." "That's all I ask," she murmured against his chest. As they continued their walk, Yates made a conscious effort to notice the beauty around them, the wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow, the fresh green buds on the trees, the clear water of the creek reflecting the blue sky above. Signs of new life were everywhere, promising renewal after the long winter. April brought warm days interspersed with spring showers that turned their land lush and green. Yates threw himself into spring planting, while Zara, now in her 6th month, directed operations from the porch when her energy flagged. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together in the cabin working on the nursery, a knock sounded at their door. Surprised they rarely had unannounced visitors. Especially in poor weather, Yates went to answer it. A young woman stood on their porch soaked to the skin, a small bundle clutched to her chest. Yates recognized her vaguely as someone who had recently arrived in town, though he couldn't recall her name. Mrs. Larson? Zara appeared beside him, recognition in her voice. "What on earth are you doing out in this weather? Come in, come in." The young woman stepped into their cabin, water dripping from her clothes onto the floor. As she moved, Yates realized the bundle she carried was a baby, perhaps only a few months old. "I'm so sorry to intrude," Mrs. Larson said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know where else to go. They said in town that Mrs. Crawford was knowledgeable about herbal remedies, and William." She broke off, looking down at the bundle in her arms. "He's burning with fever, and the doctor's away until tomorrow." Zara immediately took charge, instructing Yates to stoke the fire while she examined the infant. The baby was indeed feverish, his small face flushed, his breathing rapid. "How long has he been like this?" Zara asked, her manner calm and reassuring despite the seriousness of the situation. "Since this morning," Mrs. Larson replied, wringing her hands. "It came on so suddenly. He was fine yesterday, just a slight cough, but today—" She broke off, tears filling her eyes. "You did right to come here," Zara assured her. "I can make a tea that should help bring down his fever. Yates, would you fetch my herb box from the pantry?" For the next hour, Zara worked tirelessly, preparing a mild herbal tea suitable for an infant, showing the young mother how to sponge the baby with lukewarm water to cool his body gradually. Yates watched in admiration as his wife calmly instructed Mrs. Larson, her voice steady, her hands gentle as she demonstrated the proper technique. By the time the rain had stopped and evening was approaching, the baby's fever had begun to subside. His breathing was easier, and he had taken a little of the herbal tea from a spoon. "You should stay the night," Zara insisted when Mrs. Larson spoke of returning to town. "The roads will be muddy, and William needs to rest." "I couldn't impose," the young woman began. "It's no imposition," Yates said firmly. "We have plenty of room, and it would be foolish to risk the journey back tonight." After some persuasion, Mrs. Larson agreed to stay. As Yates prepared a simple supper for them all, he overheard the two women talking softly by the fire, where they sat watching over the sleeping infant. "You're very good with him," Zara was saying, "especially for someone so young." Mrs. Larson smiled tiredly. "I'm 22, hardly a child, though I admit becoming a mother at 21 was a shock." "And you're managing alone?" Zara asked gently. The young woman nodded. "My husband died in a mining accident 2 months before William was born. I came here to stay with my cousin, but," she sighed, "it's hard being alone with a baby." "You're not alone anymore," Zara said, placing a hand on Mrs. Larson's arm. "You have friends here now." Later that night, after their guest had been settled in the spare room with her baby, Yates found Zara standing by the window in their bedroom, gazing out at the stars that had appeared after the rain. "You were amazing today," he said, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her growing belly. Zara leaned back against him. "I just did what needed to be done." "No, it was more than that," Yates insisted. "The way you knew exactly what to do, how calm you stayed. You're going to be a wonderful mother." "Zara?" She turned in his arms, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he said firmly. "I've always known it." She rested her head against his chest, her voice thoughtful. "Seeing Mrs. Larson with her baby, how devoted she is despite everything she's been through. It reminded me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about how you put yourself back together afterward." Yates tightened his arms around her, thinking of their own journey over the past year, how they had shattered, how they had slowly, painfully rebuilt what had been broken. "We're stronger now than we were before," he said softly. "Yes," Zara agreed. "Stronger together." May arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Yates completed work on the nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow at Zara's request, building a rocking chair to match the cradle he'd carved. Zara, now in her 8th month, moved more slowly, but remained determined to keep up with her usual tasks. Her mother had written offering to come stay with them for the birth and the weeks following, and after some discussion, they had gratefully accepted. One warm afternoon, as Zara sat on the porch shelling peas while Yates worked in the garden nearby, the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. To their surprise, it was Mrs. Larson Emily, as they now called her, with baby William, who had fully recovered from his illness. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit," Emily called as she brought the wagon to a stop. "William and I were in the area, and he insisted on thanking his saviors personally." Zara laughed, setting aside her work to greet them. "Well, we can hardly refuse such an important visitor, can we?" As Emily lifted her son from the wagon, Yates moved to help her down, struck by how much more confident and relaxed she seemed compared to their first meeting. The young woman had become a frequent visitor to their homestead over the past month, forming a friendship with Zara that seemed beneficial to them both. "I brought you something," Emily said, retrieving a package from the wagon once William was settled in Zara's arms. "A thank you gift, though it hardly seems adequate." Unwrapping the package, Zara gasped in delight. Inside was a beautiful baby quilt, pieced together in a star pattern of blues and yellows. "Emily, it's exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the fine stitching. "Did you make this yourself?" Emily nodded, blushing with pleasure at Zara's reaction. "Quilting is one thing I'm good at. My mother taught me, and I've always found it soothing." "It's a wonderful gift," Yates said sincerely. "Thank you." They spent a pleasant afternoon together, sharing a light meal on the porch while William practiced his newly discovered crawling skills on a blanket in the shade. Watching Zara with the baby, Yates felt a surge of love and anticipation. She was a natural with children, her patience and gentleness evident in every interaction. After Emily and William departed, promising to visit again soon, Zara carefully folded the quilt and placed it in the cradle waiting in the nursery. "It's perfect there," she said, stepping back to admire the effect. "Our little one will sleep well beneath Emily's stars." Yates wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting on her belly where their child moved restlessly. "Just a few more weeks now," he said softly. Zara nodded, leaning against him. "I can't wait to meet him or her." "Are you scared?" Yates asked, the question that had been on his mind for months finally finding voice. Zara considered this, her hand joining his on her rounded belly. "Yes," she admitted, "but not like before. This time the fear doesn't consume me." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "This time, I know whatever happens. We'll face it together." June arrived with sweltering heat and the final countdown to the baby's arrival. Martha Wilkins arrived from Denver on the 1st of the month, bringing with her a trunk full of baby clothes and supplies, as well as her comfortable maternal presence that put both Yates and Zara at ease. With Martha there to help with household tasks, Zara was able to rest more, which the doctor had been encouraging as her due date approached. She spent much of her time on the porch swing Yates had built, watching the activity of the homestead while working on last-minute preparations for the baby. Yates found himself increasingly nervous as the days passed, jumping at every sound, rushing to Zara's side at the slightest grimace or sigh. Martha observed his anxiety with amused tolerance, assuring him repeatedly that everything was progressing normally. "Fathers are always the most frightened ones," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch while Zara napped inside. "Thomas was exactly the same when Zara was born, pacing like a caged mountain lion, certain every twinge meant disaster." "I just want them both to be safe," Yates said, voicing his deepest fear. "I can't lose either of them, Martha." Martha patted his hand sympathetically. "I know, dear, but Zara is strong and healthy. The baby is in the right position according to the doctor, and I've delivered more than my share of babies in my time. We're as prepared as we can be." Her words were reassuring, but Yates found that only the feel of Zara in his arms each night, the sound of her steady breathing beside him, could truly calm his fears. On the morning of June 15th, Yates woke at dawn to find Zara already awake, her hands resting on her belly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Everything all right?" he asked, instantly alert. She smiled at him, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her eyes. "I think today might be the day," she said softly. "I've been having pain since about midnight, getting stronger and more regular." Yates sat up quickly, his heart racing. "Why didn't you wake me? I'll get your mother, send for the doctor." "Slow down, cowboy," Zara said, catching his hand before he could leap from the bed. "There's plenty of time yet. First babies don't usually rush into the world." Despite her calm assurance, Yates insisted on waking Martha, who confirmed that Zara appeared to be in the early stages of labor. She sent Yates to inform the doctor that the baby was coming, then calmly began preparations, boiling water and setting out the clean linens they had ready. The day passed in a blur for Yates. He was torn between staying by Zara's side and keeping busy with chores to distract himself from his anxiety. The doctor arrived mid-morning, checked on Zara, and pronounced everything progressing normally, though he warned it might be many hours yet before the baby arrived. As the sun began to set, Zara's labor intensified. The doctor and Martha shooed Yates from the bedroom, insisting he would only be in the way. He paced the small cabin, wincing at each cry of pain from behind the closed door, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. Emily Larson arrived unexpectedly with a basket of food and offers of help, having heard from the doctor in town that the baby was coming. Her calm presence and practical assistance taking over the kitchen, making sure Yates ate something, keeping a fresh supply of hot water ready, proved invaluable as the night wore on. Just after midnight, as Yates sat with his head in his hands, the sound he had been both longing for and dreading finally came the thin, outraged wail of a newborn taking its first breath. He was on his feet instantly, heart pounding, when the bedroom door opened and Martha appeared, her face tired but radiant. "You have a daughter, Yates," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "A beautiful, healthy little girl." Relief and joy crashed over him in a wave so powerful his knees nearly buckled. "And Zara?" he managed to ask. "Tired but well," Martha assured him. "She's asking for you." Yates entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. The doctor was gathering his things, nodding a congratulation as he passed. And there on the bed was Zara, pale and exhausted but smiling, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Yates approached the bed, suddenly afraid again not of loss this time, but of the overwhelming love he felt as he looked down at the tiny face nestled against Zara's breast. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like his own, and a small, perfect nose that reminded him of Zara's. "Would you like to hold her?" Zara asked, seeing his hesitation. Carefully, as if handling the most precious treasure in the world, Yates took his daughter into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Yet he felt the weight of responsibility and love settle onto his shoulders with a permanence that took his breath away. "Hello, little Hope," he whispered, using the name they had chosen months before. "I'm your pa." The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny hand escaping the blanket to wrap around his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Yates understood completely what Zara had meant about her heart expanding. The love he felt for this tiny being was entirely new, yet it existed alongside his love for Zara, without diminishing either. He sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Hope in one arm while his free hand found Zara's. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought her into the world." "We did it," Zara corrected, squeezing his fingers. "Together." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythms of life with a newborn. Nights became a blur of feedings and diaper changes, days a constant adjustment to the needs of their daughter. Martha's presence was invaluable, her experience guiding them through the challenges of new parenthood. Emily Larson visited often, bringing William to meet the new arrival, offering companionship to Zara during the long days of recovery. The two young mothers formed a stronger bond, sharing the unique joys and trials of raising children on the frontier. One evening, about 2 weeks after Hope's birth, Yates returned from chores to find Zara sitting on the porch swing, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, creating a picture so beautiful it stopped him in his tracks. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to sit beside her. Zara looked up at him, her face serene, despite the shadows of fatigue beneath her eyes. "I was thinking about how close we came to losing this," she said quietly. After we lost the first baby, when I left, I thought our story was over. Yates took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I never believed that, he said. Even when you were gone, even when I didn't know if you'd come back. I knew our story wasn't finished. How? Zara asked. How did you know when I wasn't sure myself? Yates thought back to those dark months, to the emptiness of their cabin without her, to the hope he had clung to despite everything. Because what we have is rare, he said finally. The kind of love that doesn't come along twice in a lifetime, and I couldn't believe that was meant to end in heartbreak. Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, their daughter nestled between them. I'm so glad you didn't give up on us, she whispered. Never, Yates promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. We're not done, Zara Crawford, not by a long shot. As twilight deepened around them, bringing out the first stars of the evening, they sat together in companionable silence, 3 hearts beating as one family. The past year had taught them that life offered no guarantees, that joy and sorrow often walked hand in hand. But it had also shown them the strength they possessed together, the resilience to rebuild what had been broken, the courage to hope again after devastating loss. Their story, like the frontier they had chosen to call home, was filled with challenges and unexpected beauty. And as they gazed down at their daughter's peaceful face, they knew that the chapters ahead, whatever they might hold, would find them facing the future together, stronger for having weathered the storm, wiser for having known grief, and infinitely more grateful for the precious gift of love they had nearly lost but found again. As summer gave way to autumn, and autumn to another winter, hope grew and thrived. The small grave on the hill remained a sacred place for them, a reminder of what they had lost, but also of how far they had come. Sometimes they visited it together, telling their daughter about the siblings she would never meet, but who would always be part of their family story. And on quiet evenings, as they sat by the fire with Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Yates would sometimes take Zara's hands in his and repeat the words that had brought them back from the brink. We're not done. It had become both a promise and a celebration, an acknowledgement of the painful path they had walked and the beautiful life they continued to build together in their corner of the Wild West.